large-scale amphibious exercises held on both the Pacific and Atlantic coast of the United States. This was all being improvised. No one really knew how to make a large-scale amphibious invasion, and especially one of the size of Operation Torch, where many of the troops would come not from a base in Europe, but direct from the United States.
The reason for Hitler's success in North Africa is the Panzer Corps, which had been formed 2 years earlier. At that time, Heinz Oberger is a non-commissioned officer in the Panzer Army.
Die Italiener hatten in September
1940, the Italians crossed the Egyptian border and they advanced about 80 kilometers into West Egypt. In December, the British went on the defensive under General Wavell. In a relatively short time, they broke through and threatened Tripoli. Hitler said we need to prevent an Axis member from an impending defeat, and he ordered the founding of the German Afrika Corps. Later, we became an elite group. At the beginning, it was just normal soldiers who joined. We began the transfer to Naples and Brindisi, and from there we were shipped to Tripoli. We dreamed of palm trees and savannas, and we were deeply disappointed when we arrived in a landscape that consisted only of sand. Palms were a rarity, and water was short. When there was water, it was salty. We had little opportunity to get rid of our disappointment because Rommel, who was named leader of the Afrika Corps, immediately ordered the march to the east to prevent further advance of the British. After Rommel led a few surprise attacks, British General Wavell said, "He is sly as a fox and we have to watch out for him." And since that time, he had the name the Desert Fox.
After controlling North Africa for 2 years, Rommel's crushing panzer unit is in for a series of major losses. At the end of October, an armada of 350 warships and 500 transports secretly heads out to sea from various ports in the United States and Great Britain. Their rendezvous, a point 4,000 miles away off the North Africa coast.
Once at sea, the men were told their destination was French North Africa, and that they were...
Admiral Jean Darlan, second in command in the French Vichy government, personally orders a ceasefire in North Africa. On November 13th, a treaty with the French is signed. The North African territory is now under Allied jurisdiction. Although French crowds welcome American troops, there's reason for the soldiers to be skeptical.
The French saw the Allied invasion of North Africa not as liberation. In contrast, when the Germans moved into Tunisia soon after the Allied invasions, the French military in Tunisia did not resist the Germans, but rather withdrew from the crucial airfield.
Rommel builds up his strength for a decisive counterattack, landing more than 1,000 men a day. The Tunisian ports of Bizerte and Tunis form a defense line for the Germans. But Allied planes bomb the newly arrived forces. Comes the real battle. American troops clash with well-trained panzer units.
The U.S. Army was first introduced to World War II-style mobile warfare at Kasserine Pass. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass, a quick-moving German counterattack defeated a largely scratch collection of American units in the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Armored Division, other units. These were pushed back from the Kasserine Pass. This was a key pass in the escarpment between Tunisia and Algeria. By pushing them back, the Germans laid open the possibility of a counterattack towards the plains in Algeria, imperiling the Allied lines of communication.
For American tank units trying to establish superiority, bloody battles lie ahead, as well as a lesson in humility for the Desert Fox. The German reaction to the Anglo-American invasion is instantaneous. By December, the Germans pushed back the British First Army on its approach to Tunis. Strong American forces and even some newly allied French units move up to support the British First Army.
Winter of 1942 and 43 in Tunisia and Algeria was very difficult. Rain, mud, mechanized forces ground to a halt. Storms washed away bridges, washed away roads. Airfields became seas of mud. Aircraft couldn't operate. So the chances of a quick victory after the landings in Torch, in taking Tunisia, were in many ways prevented by weather.
Weapons were constantly covered in dust, and they had to be cleaned if they were to work at all. Added to that, there was generally a great shortage of water because the few wells that existed were used up very quickly, and one couldn't remove the salt to the point that it was suitable for human consumption.
The Allies are caught by surprise and have to fight a series of delaying actions. Hill by hill, valley by valley, they are driven back.
The U.S. had to learn modern warfare in Tunisia. The Germans had been doing this successfully against the British since 1941. And the fact that they were only able to do this against the Americans one time at Kasserine Pass really shows how quickly the U.S. Army was able to learn these lessons.
Although the Germans are beating back the Americans, their fuel and food are running low. Rommel's requests to Hitler for help are not being answered.
Tunisia saw for the first time the German Tiger heavy tank committed to combat in the West. These were much larger, more powerful than the Sherman tanks, designed and built in the United States, that equipped the bulk of both British and American armor. The Tiger had an 88mm gun, very thick armor, and was very difficult to destroy.
Rommel continues his push, threatening to cut the Allied armies in half. To plug the gap at the strategic Kasserine Pass, 2 American divisions speed eastward from Iran. Thousands of trucks hauling all important supplies are a major factor in the battle. The weather clears, and 104 American aircraft heavily bombard the German lines. While Operation Torch forces race in from the northwest, General Montgomery and his 8th Army strike the Meroth Line from the southern flank.
Fortunately for the British, they had ultra signal decrypts. They knew where the Germans were positioning their forces. The British had also been able to build up supplies, which had lagged behind during the pursuit after El Alamein, and were able to hook around through the desert and outflank much of the Meroth Line. So guarded by much of the German strength in Tunisia, the Meroth Line did not block the Allied advance.
On the 26th of March, resistance along the Meroth Line is broken. The Germans begin to retreat. On the 7th of April, the Americans link up with the British 8th Army. The trap is springing shut on Rommel. The last great assaults begin, with the Allies gaining the upper hand.
Tunisia ended with very hard fighting. The objectives were the two key seaports of Bizerte and Tunis, for which the Germans supplied their forces and at the end tried to evacuate them. German army on the defensive is always a formidable opponent. The Germans and their Italian allies, once they were unable through counterattacks to throw the Allies back from the borders of Tunisia, put up strong defensive locations along hills, would mount local counterattacks, interlocking fields of fire from machine gun. Even if they were outgunned by the Allies, their use of light artillery mortars to pin down attacking infantry made most of the British and Allied attacks very costly. Rommel's powerful reputation was part of the Germans' effectiveness. George Patton took over the Second Corps, which was the main U.S. strike force, and he said, I'm not going to be intimidated by Rommel, and the U.S. was able to make sure that they did not develop a complex about Rommel being an invincible general.
By now, there is no alternative left for the Germans but to give up.
In the spring of 43, we were disappointed and angry at Hitler because he didn't send us any supplies. The only thing he sent us were orders to Rommel. You can lead your troops into victory or defeat. We had nothing left for victory, so the only thing left for us was defeat.
September 3rd, 1943, as Allied armies complete their conquest of Sicily, they prepare to invade Italy itself. Two divisions of the British 8th Army cross to the southern tip of Italy, where they encounter only minor German resistance. That same day, the Italian government surrenders. On September 9th, the 5th Army, composed of 3 American and 3 British divisions, launches an amphibious assault on the west coast of Italy at Salerno Bay, 30 miles south of Naples. One of the soldiers in combat for the first time with the 36th Texas Division is Al Dietrich.
The invasion of Salerno Bay on September the 9th was, I imagine, like any other invasion, but we did not know what to anticipate. We knew we were going into combat, but what was combat? We had no idea, really. We had been conditioned to peak, and we were ready to go. Any more training, we would have been overtrained. So we were ready. I knew I was going to go into combat now, and this was going to be the beginning of the end of the war.
For nearly a week, the Allies are surrounded by the Germans. However, the U.S. sends in air power, and combined with the big guns of the British Navy, they break out of the stranglehold.
We had not been on shore hardly an hour when we heard the thunder of tanks.
October 1st, the Fifth Army marches victoriously into the city of Naples. It is an important strategic point because it will provide a perfect port for landing men and supplies once it is cleared of the destruction left behind by the Germans. There is confidence that the Allies will get to Rome within 2 months. However, the Germans mobilize all their units in Italy. They must be ready to counteract any Allied breakthrough.
When the Allies invaded Italy, Adolf Hitler thought at first of withdrawing all the German troops in southern Italy to the north. But Kesselring, who was the commander-in-chief in Italy, talked him into letting him retreat slowly. Kesselring was successful in keeping the Allies to a very slow advance.
Under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring's plan, the Germans are to make the Allied advance as costly as possible. Risking only small forces, they take hilltop positions in the Italian countryside. From these strongholds, they are able to strafe their attackers with impunity. When their own positions are seriously threatened, they simply withdraw a mile or two and repeat the process. They are always protected by the terrain, while the Allies are in the open, where they are hit over and over again.
Every man has his own battle. There's a war out there, and there's a battlefront. Your unit is committed, but you as an individual are committed, and you are going to encounter an enemy right in front of you, and that's what happened to me.
October 1943. The Allies are meeting progressively stiffer resistance in their push into the heart of Italy. The German withdrawal is not going to be a simple retreat. As they leave a position, engineers and labor battalions are building a strong defense barrier, which becomes known as the Gustav Line. The only thing in the Allies' favor is a strong and aggressive air force. But in mid-November, cold rain and even snow begins to fall. With these inclement flying conditions, the Air Force is of little help. Even on the ground, American tanks get bogged down in the mud. Before they even encounter the Gustav Line, the Allies recognize the slowing momentum and pause for some rest and regrouping. With Rome still 90 miles away and progress at a halt, none of the troops believe they will be in the Eternal City within 2 months. Meanwhile, everyone suffers from the conditions. The Liri Valley is the most critical defensive position on the Gustav Line. Monte Cassino, an 1,100-foot peak, guards the entrance to the best approach to Rome through this valley.
They had labor battalions that used to prepare defense positions if the Germans had to fall back to. We didn't have that, but then again, we never really fell back.
The Germans have placed large guns inside natural and man-made caves and have well-protected machine gun nests all over the mountain. Everywhere else, the slopes are lined with miles of barbed wire and thousands of anti-personnel mines. The most difficult issue for the Allies is the presence of an historic monastery sitting on top of the mountain. This site, holy to Christians all over the world, is where Saint Benedict founded the Benedictine Order of Monks in the 6th century. If the Allies damage or destroy the structure in the heat of battle, they risk offending a large part of the religious world. December 1st, the move forward resumes. The Fifth Army launches an attack on its next objective, a group of hills behind Monte Cassino. The key to this range is Monte Camino. In a major assault, nearly 1,000 big guns direct their fire on this hillside.
The idea of the Germans being on the high points on the mountains in this terrible terrain meant that they could see the approaches, and there are few places in Italy where an army can advance, and since the Germans could see those very clearly, it was very easy for them to block those routes of advance. And so Monte Cassino was very important to the Germans.
The Germans were quoted as saying, "What did you hate most about the American army?" They said, "The artillery." They just fired so many shells at that mountain. I guess they call it $1 Million Hill, yeah.
With the $1 Million Hill taken, Americans advanced to the more open country beyond Monte Camino. But the smaller hills are even more fortified and harder to take. It's not until the middle of January that the last of these hills falls. 1 mile away is the Rapido River, and right behind that lies Monte Cassino. The 5th Army, using 8 divisions, has taken 6 weeks to advance 8 miles, suffering nearly 16,000 casualties. But now there's a new aggressive push. A simultaneous amphibious landing is set to take place at Anzio, 30 miles to the north. The troops already moving through the Italian hills must launch an immediate offensive against the Gustav Line to draw the German reinforcements away from the Anzio area. The 36th Division is to spearhead the drive. Troops like Al Dietrich are conserving their strength.
You didn't wait for night to sleep. There was a system that all armed infantry units used, the buddy-buddy system. There's 2 of you per foxhole. One slept while the other one stayed on guard. And you decided among yourselves whether you want to sleep 2 hours or 3 or 4. Our commanding general, General Walker, he says, it's been written that no river that has been used as a main line of defense has ever been breached in history. So I think that pretty well sums it up, that there had to be a different strategy to cross that river or get to the enemy on the other side of that river.
With the heavily fortified Monte Cassino looking down on them, the troops have to hope there will be another strategy. On January 20th, 1944, Allied troops camped at the Rapido River make a concerted attack on the Gustav Line at the German stronghold of Monte Cassino. They want to break through the line, but they must also create a diversion and tie up German units, while other American and British soldiers make a landing at Anzio. The toughest assignment falls to the 36th Division.
The regiment jumped off on schedule. Every man was supposed to carry an extra battle air ammunition across with him, which is like an invasion. This is an invasion across the river of the enemy side, just like coming in Salerno, you brought extra ammunition. They managed to get the most of 1 battalion across, but the other battalions had difficulty, the same as the 141st. Artillery, poor visibility, equipment getting shot up, didn't get them demoralized, lost sense of direction. The Germans could hear the movement of some 1,500 to 2,000 troops moving in the night, and they had pre-registered all of their artillery on that river, and they just opened up.
German artillery prevents the building of a pontoon bridge across the river. All boats, footbridges, and telephone wires are destroyed. The men who have gotten to the German side of the river run out of ammunition. They try to return, but only the strong swimmers are able to get to safety. In this operation, 1,681 men of the Texas Division are lost. The only benefit of the battle is that the Allied assault on Cassino succeeds in bringing more German reinforcements to the Gustav Line and making the landing at Anzio easier. Still bogged down, the Allies plan a second attack on Monte Cassino, but the question of the monastery on top of the mountain plagues the Allies.
The bombing of the monastery, I agree with General Walker, our commander, said, well, the abbey is not being manned by Germans, so they're just observers. But if we bomb the abbey and destroy it, they still remain up there. The height is still there. You can't flatten the mountain.
The decision is made that the 10-foot thick walls will give the Germans a second line of defense, so the monastery must be bombed. On February 14th, leaflets are dropped to the abbot, 5 monks, and 200 refugees living in the monastery. They are warned that the site will be attacked, and no specific date is given. The 80-year-old abbot asks the Germans to provide an escort to safety. He is assured they will have their escort within 2 days. The next day, with everyone still inside the monastery, both the Allied troops and the Germans hear the sound of bombers approaching.
The abbey certainly was on target, completely destroyed it, but later, as General Clark said, you can't move the enemy out with bombing alone. You have to have infantry go in. And when all the dust settled and the infantry tried to make their moves, the Germans were still there.
Since no one has been notified of the timing of the air assault, the unprepared British troops see this as an opportunity to attack. But they are at half strength, and their advance comes with a terrible cost in lives. They advance on the north to within 1,000 yards of Monte Cassino and the railroad station on the south end of the town of Cassino. But they can advance no further. The second attack on Monte Cassino has ended in a deadlock.
When the bombing failed to result in taking the hill, the Germans moved into the monastery, and so they used the ruined abbey now as a defensive position.
March 15th, the Germans still hold the town of Cassino at the foot of the mountain. 500 Allied planes hit the town with 1,400 tons of bombs.
These strategic bombers, as their names imply, are used really to take out industry and to take out the civilian will to resist. But here, this was an experiment of sorts. This is the first time that they were used in support of ground troops.
In the wake of the surprise bombing, a full-scale attack is launched against the stunned enemy. Finally, Monte Cassino falls. Indian Gurkha troops clamber halfway up Monte Cassino itself to occupy a spur of the mountain called Hangman's Hill. It looks like victory is inevitable, but bad luck prevails. A reserve battalion fails to receive orders to join the assault. The initial momentum is lost. The German 1st Paratroop Division seizes the opportunity to swarm down the mountain slopes to counterattack Allied strongpoints.
condition of the German troops was excellent. They had turned back 2 very strong Allied attacks. The Gustav Line was still in operation. It was still invulnerable. It was still impregnable. And the German soldiers were in excellent condition. They just felt they had to turn back the Allies, and nobody could dispossess them of that ground.
On March 23rd, the third offensive against Monte Cassino is called off as winter descends on Italy. During the following weeks, there are no major actions. Sitting out the bad weather, the Allied commander in Italy, British General Sir Harold Alexander, strengthens his forces along the Gustav Line. The Germans think he has 6 divisions, but he is able to assemble 13.
You have to do things in combat that you don't know what the outcome is going to be, really. But you have to try them sometime. The bombing of the Abbey, to me, was nothing as compared to the crossing of the Rapido, where so many lives were at stake.
On May 11th, the final major assault begins. Between the sea and the mountains, the U.S. Second Corps on the left flank moves forward, but is stopped. To its right, the French Corps treks over the Urumqi Mountains to catch the Germans by surprise. It threatens to weaken the Liri Valley defenses. In the center, the 13th British Corps crosses the Rapido below Cassino. And to the north, the Polish Corps swings behind Monte Cassino.
Concentrated, and they attacked in May.
Push on through Italy. On June 4th, 1944, the American Fifth Army marches into Rome. 2 days later, on D-Day, the other armies of the Allies land in Normandy. Overshadowed by the monumental invasion on the French coast, the Battle of Cassino is just another episode of World War II. Soon after Cassino, Al Dietrich would be transferred out of combat infantry.
I was assigned to Ardent Transporter Company, transferring armor to armored units, tanks, half-tracks. I always felt for the infantryman because I knew what he was going through. I think that living as the infantryman has to live is even harder than dying.
The Battle of Monte Cassino is remembered by many for its destruction of a historic place of worship. But others honor the tremendous sacrifice of soldiers from many nations who are willing to give their lives in the service of their countries. It also serves to remind future generations that on a battlefront, there is no shortage of destruction and suffering. In 1942, an armada of American and British warships heads for North Africa to make the first Allied amphibious landing of World War II. Pushing back the Axis powers, the Allies now have their first foothold on foreign soil. From the moment when the Allied armies begin pushing back the German army, the ultimate goal has been to invade France. To do so, the Allies need to break through Hitler's formidable seawall. For 4 years, he has been building this barrier of concrete, steel, and artillery all along the Atlantic coast of France. September 1943, the American 1st Division, the Big Red One, lands at Liverpool. Veterans of landings in Africa and Sicily, they join the 1,500,000 Americans gathering in England for the invasion of Europe. Among them is 22-year-old Walter Martinez with the 2nd Ranger Battalion.
They broke our outfits up, and when we went there to England, we were what you call like replacement, repa depots. And when we got there, we were filling in different outfits, you know, to bring him up to strength, because some of these outfits, particularly mine, they had fought in Anzio and Salerno. So in England, they came around to the repa depots looking for us, very new from the state, even though some of us had 2 and 3 years to fill in these outfits, but the Ranger outfit was strictly a volunteer. Rangers as a whole, they spearhead for outfits. Spearhead means that you have to break through.
To prepare Operation Overlord, as Churchill has named the invasion, 16 million tons of weaponry will have arrived in New England by invasion time. Meanwhile, Allied troops are subjected to the most rigorous training they have ever known.
I was trained real hard. We learned how to jump, using all kinds of TNT dynamite to blow up for railroad tracks behind the lines, and most anything that had to do with combat, we were pretty well trained. The rifles and guns like that, we knew pretty well, but just tactics. As a matter of fact, the British liaison, they used to say, you guys train harder than the war it actually is. And some of these guys knew because they had fought in North Africa. The people who trained me were Rangers. And sometimes I wonder if I was more afraid of them than I was of the Germans, because these guys were really tough and rugged. We had boxing tournaments within the battalions and division regimentals. And if you boxed, they give you 3 days off in London so you can cure your wounds.
Across the English Channel, the Germans continue to fortify their strength. Since its conception, the Atlantic Wall has been Hitler's obsession. Thousands of laborers have worked to forge its guns, machine gun bunkers, and concrete obstacles, which have made it into a fearsome barricade. The wall would even be stronger if Germany's commander-in-chief in the west, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, 4 hours of the landing will be decisive. Even with troop strength depleted by the demands of the Russian front and the Allied landings at Anzio, 14 German divisions are lined up and waiting by the middle of May. One of them is the Panzer Lehr that is brought in from Hungary.
Well, the Panzer Lehr was one of the crack divisions of the German army, and it had been brought to Normandy almost at full strength. They only had 2 weeks to prepare for the fighting in Normandy, but the Panzer Lehr was in good shape. It had armaments, it had Tiger tanks, it had personnel, and it was, in fact, perhaps the best fighting division in the German army.
The actual deployment of the Panzer Lehr at Normandy creates a division in the German High Command.
The great debate in the German defenses was between Rundstedt and Rommel. And Rundstedt believed that to stop the invasion, you would have to allow the troops to get ashore, and then, when they were ashore but could not get out of the pocket, hit them with everything you had. In other words, to allow the landings to occur and then hit the troops once they were ashore. Rommel, on the other hand, felt that the only way to stop the invasion was to hit the troops on the beaches before they could get ashore.
To boost morale, General Dwight D. Eisenhower visits the troops in England.
Whenever you saw somebody of high brass come near the battle area, it was impressive, and we always found...
The Allied probing maneuvers have created confusion within German intelligence.
The Allies had carefully planted phony information for a year before the invasion. They had been bombing the Pas-de-Calais regularly, and that's the shortest route across the Channel. The Normandy route is considerably longer.
The weather odds are also analyzed by Field Marshal Rommel. On June 5th, he leaves his headquarters to go home for his wife's birthday, convinced the Allies will never land in bad weather. But Allied forces are preparing to deliver Rommel a surprise. June 6, 1944. The seas in the Channel are typically rough as the armada of 5,300 ships move toward an obstacle that separates Europe from its liberation. Overhead, thousands of fighter planes. Also, hundreds of troop transports and gliders carrying the paratroop vanguard of the invasion. conditions are not ideal for the invasion. The waves are high and the clouds are threatening. But the loading of the convoys goes on, following General Eisenhower's orders.
At that time, we had no emotion, no feeling. We just were so tense in the job that was before us that about any order he gave, we would have followed.
What the Germans saw was a sight that had never been seen before and will never be seen again. An invasion of such dimensions as to be almost incredible. The sea was full of ships. The first question was, is this the real invasion? The men who were on the beaches who saw those 5,000 ships knew very well that this was the real invasion. But the intelligence reports back in Berlin left the question as to whether this was the real thing. There was always the question in Hitler's mind and the minds of the other commanders, was this the real thing, or was this just to draw the panzers away from the Pas-de-Calais, where the real invasion would follow?
Loaded with 32 men each, the landing craft start their run for the beach.
You have a lot of thoughts. What bothered me the most was that we were so jammed, and a lot of guys got seasick, so we had to walk to a mess. Let me put it this way, it was very uncomfortable. The motion sickness was actually taking its toll. Guys were ready to swim in if they had to.
It was an armada, the greatest armada ever put together in the history of the world. And when the Germans saw it, they could only marvel at it, and they knew that war was over. There's a marvelous comment in Cornelius Ryan's book on D-Day, in which one of the German officers who survived said later, when I saw that, I knew it was the end for Germany.
For the 8 companies of men approaching Omaha Beach, the nightmarish obstacles Rommel has planted begin to pay off for the Germans. Here the struggle is the fiercest. Omaha Beach is 6 miles of hell, with 100-foot cliffs at either end. A landing at Omaha Beach turns into disaster. Utah Beach is nearly the opposite. The U.S. 4th Division lands there with little resistance and moves rapidly inland. At Juno Beach, the high seas and German defenses are frustrating the Canadians. The sandy strip is marked with the dead and dying of both sides. Sword Beach is small, but because it is a naval port, it is guarded by heavy gun emplacements. Weather and terrain take many casualties from the British First Wave. At Gold Beach, amphibious tanks are vital in wiping out enemy gun emplacements. The men are not fighting alone. 10,000 flights of aircraft battered German defenses with more than 11,000 tons of bombs. Of all the beaches, Omaha is where the battle is fiercest and results in the most casualties.
That was the hard area there where they cut railroad tracks and they buried them in an angle, so when our gliders went in there, they took a tremendous toll of our people. It was a hell of a stench. Gunfire, a lot of wreckage in that beach, a lot of bodies.
German air.
With troops moving inland everywhere, it is apparent that the Allies' gamble is paid off. Although nobody knows the exact figure, approximately 160,000 men are ashore by the end of D-Day. The beachhead is secure.
It was a really say, well, what I went through, and I'm here. You know, it's a weird feeling that's very hard to explain. I'm here.
The invasion of Normandy would signal the death knell for German domination of Europe. For that prize, nearly 4,000 men would give their lives on Omaha Beach alone. By day's end, Germans are surrendering or in retreat. Their Reich is beginning to crumble. Looking back on the beachhead, soldiers will remember this landing as the longest day.
Hitler and his generals feverishly drafted their plans for the conquest of Britain. Every detail must be anticipated. A slip now might wreck the whole timetable of world conquest. 6 weeks of final preparation went into those plans. 6 weeks to determine the history of 1,000 years. The thing was foolproof. See for yourselves how simple the whole operation was to be. Look.
German plan for invasion of England. Phase 1. Knock out the Royal Air Force and its bases. Get control of the air and the sea lanes across the Channel. Follow the Blitz plan that had wiped out Poland, the Low Countries, and France. Destroy communication and transport lines. Above all, get command of the air. Phase 2. Pulverize the coastline with dive bombers. Drop parachute troops to take over the airfields and establish beachheads. Phase 3. Actual invasion. Pour the German panzer divisions across in high-speed barges under an umbrella protecting fighter planes. Then send spearheads of armed might to divide, surround, destroy all opposition. That's all there was to it. Conquer Britain. Force the surrender of the British fleet. Then, with the combined sea power of Germany, Britain, Italy, France, and Japan, he could control the seas and tell us where to head in. The torch of freedom flickered low.
Eine wahrhaftige Weltmannschaftsspotter sein. Und zweitens, Sie wollten, Herr...
Stop thinking and follow me, cried Hitler. I will make you masters of the world. And the people answered, Heil!
Whenever I hear anyone mention the word culture, the first thing I do is reach for my gun. Yes, they had the answer. The blackjack and the gun.
Their leaders told them that they were supermen. Herrenvolk, the Nazis called it. The master race, destined to rule all other peoples on earth. Take a good look at these humorless men. These were to be the rulers of the ruling race.
Leben! Auch ihr bürgerliches Dasein ist jetzt sicher in diesem nationalsozialistischen Staat der...
Obey us blindly, and you will attain your rightful place in the world. All other people will be your slaves.
Here's the Germany Hitler walked into. And here's what he wanted. First, Europe under his complete political or economic control, leaving Mussolini a share of the loot if he behaved himself. Then the drive to the east, through the rich oil lands of Iran and Iraq, into India. Another push south through Africa. Then from Dakar, jump off to meet the honorary Aryans who were to move in on South America through the Pacific. At the same time, start across from the Scandinavian countries to hook up with his buck-toothed pals coming over from Siberia to join in the conquest of the United States.
April 9th, Norway invaded. The Battle of the Continent becomes Europe's total war. 1 month later, Holland falls. Beloved Queen Wilhelmina seeks refuge abroad. Millions of Belgians reenact the tragic migration of 1914. May 28th, Leopold, King of the Belgians, surrenders and the world despairs. Dunkirk. Here, 300,000 Allied soldiers battle and swim to safety under an inferno of fire. June 5th, the critical Battle of France begins. For 3 terrifying weeks, the armies of Wagram fall back in the face of overwhelming mechanized might. Italy, while France fights for its life, Italy marches beside Germany. Six weeks after Holland and Belgium were crushed, tragic history is enacted at Campagne. The image of General Foch watches as another conqueror arrives. He boards the same railroad car where Foch himself gave the armistice terms to the defeated Germany of 1918. These Nazi officials come with different emotions than those other Germans 22 years before. This time, French plenipotentiaries, seeking terms instead of giving them, arrive to learn the fate of their republic. Grim formality when victor and vanquished meet. With terms stated, Adolf Hitler allows time for the French to telephone the Vichy government. Solemnly, silently, the French delegates follow for conference with the man who became Premier of France only 6 days before. Henri Pétain, who must give the answer. Weighted hearts return to the historic car, bearing their fateful message. France has decided. The knee is bowed in submission with a flourish of tragic pens. War spreads eastward. Britain's fleet flanks the port of Berber and Somaliland. Defiance, alertness, strength, courage. The heroic RAF takes to the air. Another German plane meets its master. Convoyed merchantmen brave constant danger from the skies. Each ship becomes a target for the raiders' bombs. Each ship is set on getting supplies safely to Englishmen, to Welshmen, to Scots, to all ashore. Under brave General de Gaulle, 3 Frenchmen still fight Germany. London. Waves of Nazi planes swarm westward to the world's largest city. Some reach London's warehouses, tenements, and great docks. Londoners take to shelter unafraid. Old and young, their spirits undismayed. Above their heads, destruction is falling from the blacked-out heavens. Artillery and bomb pandemonium rages for hours, days, and months. London burns by night. The daylight finds undaunted grit and confidence as the job of digging out proceeds. Even the dummies get attention. We mean dummy. Buckingham Palace, symbol of empire, residence of Britain's monarchs, does not escape the Nazi reign of steel. King George and Queen Elizabeth examine a piece of the missile that demolished a part of their palace home. St. Paul's Cathedral, where royalty and commoner worship, also suffered. A bomb pierces the roof, destroys an altar, but spares other treasured monuments. The heroic RAF takes an ever-increasing toll. Nazi planes have fallen on English soil by the thousands.
May well be that the final extinction of a baleful domination will pave the way to a broader solidarity of all the men in all the land than we could ever have planned if we had not marched together through the fire.